My name is Shauna Taife, and for most of my life, I've thought of myself as just an ordinary woman. A mother, a wife, someone who worked hard, loved deeply, and wanted a simple, happy life. I grew up believing in love, in family, in the idea that if you worked hard enough, you could build a life filled with joy and stability. That's what I wanted. That's what I thought I had. I married George because I believed he was my forever. He was everything you'd want in a husband, strong, dependable, a hero to so many people. As a firefighter, he saved lives. He was the kind of man people admired, the kind of man you could trust with your life. And I did. Together, we had a daughter, a beautiful little girl who was my whole world. I wanted so badly to give her the life I'd always dreamed of, one filled with love, laughter, and security. From the outside looking in, people thought we had it all. A happy marriage, a bright future, a family that had it together. But appearances can be deceiving. Our marriage wasn't perfect. No one's is, right? We had our struggles, our arguments, the quiet moments when it felt like we were strangers sharing the same space. Over time, those moments grew longer. The fights became louder. The love we once had felt like it was slipping through my fingers, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on, it kept falling away. So, I made the hardest decision of my life. I moved out. I thought we needed space, time to figure out who we were and what we wanted. I hoped it would help us heal, that it might even bring us closer. I still believed in George. Even as the distance grew, even as things became more strained, I never stopped believing in the man I married. I thought I knew him. I thought I understood who he was. And maybe that's why I ignored the signs. When he started showing up at my apartment unannounced, I told myself it was his way of holding on to us. When he called constantly, asking questions that felt more like accusations, I told myself it was his pain talking. When I found him waiting outside late at night, I thought it was because he missed me. But deep down, there was something I couldn't shake, a feeling I didn't want to admit was there. A feeling that something wasn't right. On that night, I walked into my apartment, and everything seemed normal. The faint smell of the lavender candle I'd lit earlier lingered in the air, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. It was my sanctuary, the place where I was supposed to feel safe. But I didn't. I can't explain why, but the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. My skin prickled with unease. I looked around, my eyes darting to the smallest details, the coat I didn't remember leaving on the chair, the shoes I thought I'd put in the closet. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it was enough to make my heart race. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just tired, overthinking things. Because the alternative, that the man I once vowed to love forever could harbor a secret so terrible, was too much to bear. But the truth has a way of forcing itself into the light, whether you're ready for it or not. And when it did, it shattered everything I thought I knew. This is my story, and it's one I never thought I'd have to tell. Before we dive deeper into this story today, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this journey, and give this video thumbs up. Your support energized us for sharing these intimate stories, and remember to turn on notifications so you won't miss any future episodes. George was the kind of man who turned heads, not just because of his stature, but because of what he represented. A West Point graduate, a dedicated Las Vegas firefighter, a man whose very job was to run into danger when everyone else was running away. He had this quiet confidence about him, a presence that made people feel safe. It was one of the things that drew me to him in the first place. I met him during a time in my life when everything felt exciting and full of possibilities. I worked as a cocktail waitress at the Palms Casino, a job that kept me on my feet and surrounded by the energy of the Las Vegas nightlife. I loved it, the buzz of the crowd, the music, the constant hum of life all around me. It was hard work, but it gave me a sense of independence, of being part of something bigger. When George and I got together, it felt like two worlds colliding. He was calm and disciplined, the type who thrived in structure and order. I was vibrant and always in motion, living in the moment. We balanced each other out in a way that felt right. We fell in love quickly, and before long, we were married. Our wedding day was beautiful, filled with hope and promise. We exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other through anything life threw at us. For a while, it felt like we were doing just that. We built a life together, and soon after, we welcomed our daughter into the world. She was our everything, a bright, curious, sweet little girl who brought joy to every room she entered. From the outside, we were the picture of a happy family. Friends and neighbors would comment on how lucky we were, how perfect our lives seemed. George was a firefighter, a hero to the community. I was the loving wife and mother, holding everything together at home. But things are never as perfect as they seem, are they? As the years went on, the cracks in our marriage started to show. George's job was demanding, long hours, high stress, the kind of work that could wear anyone down. My schedule wasn't much easier, with late nights at the casino and the constant juggle of work and motherhood. We barely saw each other some days, and when we did, it often felt like we were speaking two different languages. We started arguing more. Sometimes over small things, like who left the lights on, and sometimes over things that cut much deeper. There were moments when I didn't recognize the man I had married, moments when the warmth in his eyes seemed replaced by something colder. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that all couples went through this. But as time went on, the distance between us grew wider. And with that distance came a heaviness, a tension that lingered in the air even when we weren't speaking. Eventually, we made the decision to separate. I moved out with our daughter, hoping the space would give us clarity, maybe even a chance to rebuild what we had lost. It wasn't an easy choice, but it felt like the right one at the time. I thought I knew George. I thought I understood the man I had married. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to notice things that didn't sit right. The way he would show up unannounced, the questions he would ask, the way he seemed to be watching me even when he wasn't there. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? There was a tension in his presence, a shift I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't just the weight of our separation, it was something else entirely. I didn't know it then, but the life I had built, the family I had worked so hard to protect, was already unraveling. And the man I thought I could trust with everything was about to reveal a side of himself I never saw coming. I suppose every marriage starts with the belief that it will last forever. Ours was no different. George and I had built a life together that others envied. He was the dependable one, the firefighter with a uniform that earned respect wherever he went. I was the one who brought warmth and energy, working as a cocktail waitress at the Palms Casino. We seemed like the perfect balance, complementing each other in a way that felt right. But perfection is a fragile illusion. George's job as a firefighter demanded long hours, often overnight shifts that left me to manage things on my own. My work at the casino wasn't much easier, with late-night hours and the relentless pace of Las Vegas nightlife. Our schedules rarely aligned, leaving little time for connection, for us. Slowly, we drifted into separate worlds. At first, it was small things. Missed dinners, a lack of shared moments. I remember coming home late one night, exhausted, hoping George would still be awake so we could talk. Instead, I found him asleep on the couch, a half-eaten sandwich on the coffee table. It was such a small moment, but it struck me, how even when we were in the same room, we were miles apart. The argument started not long after that. At first, they were over little things, who forgot to pay a bill or whose turn it was to take care of something around the house. But those arguments quickly became something more. George had this way of turning disagreements into accusations, making me feel like everything was my fault. I pushed back, but it only made things worse. When we fought, it wasn't just words. It was the silence that followed, the way we'd retreat into ourselves, letting the distance grow even further. We stopped sharing the little joys of life, the small victories that used to bind us together. And then came the tension. I'd see it in the way he looked at me, as though he was waiting for me to say the wrong thing. The warmth that had once been in his eyes seemed replaced by something colder. I told myself it was stress from work, that we'd get through it, that this was just a phase. Couples have rough patches, don't they? But this wasn't just a rough patch. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I suggested we separate, hoping that some space might help us find clarity. George resisted at first, but I insisted. I moved out with our daughter and into my own apartment. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I truly believed it was the best thing for all of us. That's when his behavior changed. At first, he would just call, checking in, asking about our daughter, trying to start conversations that felt more like interrogations. "Where were you today?" he'd ask. "Who did you see?" It didn't feel like concern, it felt like he was trying to keep tabs on me. Then he started showing up unannounced. Sometimes late at night, standing at my door with excuses that didn't make sense. He'd say he was just in the area, but it never felt right. And then came the moments that sent chills down my spine. I started noticing small things around my apartment. Drawers slightly open, items moved just enough to make me question if I was imagining it. One night, I came home and found the back door unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it before leaving, but there it was, wide open. And then, I found it, the small recording device hidden in my living room. I froze. My hands shook as I picked it up, my heart racing as the realization set in. George had been watching me, listening to my private moments. It was a level of violation I couldn't comprehend. I confronted him about it, but he denied everything, his voice calm, almost too calm. "You're imagining things," he said. "You're overthinking it." But I wasn't. Looking back, I can see now what I couldn't fully admit then. George wasn't just struggling with our separation. He was obsessed. And that obsession was consuming him, driving him to do things I never thought possible. While I was trying to move on with my life, George was creating a plan, one I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. It started when he befriended a man named Noel Stevens. Noel was a drifter, someone who lived on the fringes of society. George had met him while doing odd jobs around town and had taken him under his wing, offering food and money in exchange for small tasks. What I didn't know was that George had begun confiding in Noel, sharing twisted stories about me. He painted me as manipulative, unfaithful, and the reason for all his problems. He convinced Noel that I was a threat to his happiness, twisting the truth until it bore no resemblance to reality. Together, they began planning. George provided Noel with a key to my apartment, my sanctuary. They started watching me, tracking my movements, learning my routines. Surveillance footage later revealed them shopping together, purchasing tools for the crime, gloves, dark clothing, and a hammer. There were failed attempts, moments where Noel entered my apartment while I was away, intending to stage an accident. But something always went wrong. A neighbor would come by, or I'd return home earlier than expected. Each failure seemed to only deepen their resolve. George was meticulous. He called Noel repeatedly, coaching him, urging him to wait for the right moment. The level of planning and calculation was staggering. The night of September 29, 2012, was supposed to be like any other. I finished my shift at the casino and drove home, tired but looking forward to the quiet comfort of my apartment. What I didn't know was that Noel was already inside, hiding, waiting. As I walked through the door, the world I had worked so hard to rebuild came crashing down. Noel attacked me with a hammer, the blows relentless, the pain unimaginable. I tried to fight back, but I didn't stand a chance. The police found my body the next morning. My sister, frantic and heartbroken, had called them after discovering the scene. At first, George seemed untouchable. He had an alibi, he was at the fire station that night. But then the cracks in his story began to show. A misplaced cell phone near the scene led investigators to Noel. When confronted, Noel confessed everything, pointing to George as the mastermind behind it all. The trial was a painful ordeal, but it brought the truth to light. George's betrayal, Noel's actions, and the evidence left no room for doubt. George was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. My story ended that night, but the echoes of it continue. The betrayal, the loss, the questions that will never fully be answered. This is the truth that no one tells you, that sometimes, the person you trust the most can become the one who takes everything away. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? As I sit here recounting these events, I can't help but ask myself over and over again, how did it come to this? How does love, a love that once felt so full of hope and promise, turn into something so dark, so destructive? It's a question I'll never fully have the answer to, but there are pieces of the puzzle that, when put together, begin to paint a troubling picture. Looking back, it's clear that control was at the center of it all. George's actions weren't born out of love, they were rooted in a need to control me, to keep me within the boundaries he felt comfortable with. He couldn't handle the idea of me living my life independently, of me stepping away from the narrative he had built for us. That need for control evolved into obsession. At some point, George stopped seeing me as his wife, as a person with my own thoughts, feelings, and needs. Instead, I became an object, something to be possessed, something he couldn't bear to lose. And when he realized he couldn't control me anymore, he chose to destroy me instead. What makes George's actions so hard to comprehend is the depth of the betrayal. This was the man I trusted, the father of my child, someone I believed would protect me at all costs. To know that he was the one plotting against me, orchestrating my death, is a wound that cuts deeper than anything I could have imagined. Betrayal like this doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of a slow unraveling, of emotions left unchecked and resentments allowed to fester. George's inability to confront his feelings in a healthy way, his anger, his insecurities, his fear of losing control, led him down a path he couldn't return from. If there's one thing I hope my story teaches others, it's the importance of recognizing the warning signs. Control disguised as concern. Obsession masked as love. Behavior that feels invasive, manipulative, or just plain wrong. These are red flags, and they should never be ignored. I saw those signs. I felt them. The unannounced visits, the constant questions, the way George seemed to watch my every move. I knew something wasn't right, but I convinced myself it was harmless. I told myself he was just struggling to let go, that he needed time. What I didn't realize was that those signs were the beginning of something far more dangerous. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? George's inability to deal with his emotions led to a cascade of devastating events. His anger and resentment turned into obsession. That obsession drove him to manipulate Noel Stevens and, ultimately, to plot my murder. This is the danger of leaving emotions unchecked, of letting anger and insecurity fester without seeking help or resolution. George's refusal to confront his feelings in a constructive way didn't just destroy our marriage. It destroyed lives. For me, the most painful lesson is the realization that love isn't enough to save someone from their own darkness. I loved George. I believed in him. I wanted to build a life with him. But love can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. It's also a reminder of the importance of boundaries. Looking back, I wish I had drawn clearer lines, had been firmer in addressing the behaviors that made me uncomfortable. I wish I had trusted my instincts instead of dismissing them as paranoia. And finally, it's a lesson in the fragility of trust. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and when it's broken, when it's shattered in the way George shattered mine, it leaves a scar that never fully heals. I want to ask you, the viewer, to think about your own relationships. Have you ever noticed red flags that you chose to ignore? Have you ever felt uneasy about someone's behavior but brushed it off because you didn't want to believe the worst? Relationships are complex, and no one is perfect. But there's a difference between imperfection and toxicity. If something feels wrong, if someone's actions make you feel unsafe or uncomfortable, trust your instincts. And if you've been through something similar, if you've experienced a betrayal or faced danger from someone you trusted, I want you to know you're not alone. Share your story in the comments if you feel comfortable. Let others know what you've learned, what you've overcome. Because stories like mine aren't just cautionary tales. They're reminders of the strength it takes to survive, the importance of trusting yourself, and the need to hold on to hope even in the darkest moments. Even now, it's hard to accept what happened. The memories are heavy, and the questions linger. Could I have done something differently? Could this have been prevented? I don't have the answers. What I do know is that my story is one of many. There are countless others who have faced similar tragedies, who have been hurt by the people they loved the most. And while we can't change the past, we can learn from it. So I ask you to reflect, to learn, and to take action when you see the signs. Because the cost of ignoring them is far too high. As we've walked through my story, we've seen how a marriage that started with love and promise unraveled into something unimaginable. George and I shared a life, a child, and dreams for a future together. From the outside, we appeared to be the picture of happiness, but beneath the surface, cracks began to form. The growing tension, the inability to communicate, and George's deepening need for control turned our separation into a breeding ground for obsession. His desperation led him to manipulate another man, Noel Stevens, and together, they planned a crime so calculated and cold that it defies belief. From the initial signs of George's controlling behavior to the brutal attack that ended my life, this story serves as a chilling reminder of how quickly love can turn to betrayal when emotions are left unchecked. While you are enjoying this interesting story, wouldn't you mind subscribing to the channel already? What makes this story so difficult to process isn't just the tragedy of my death, it's the complexity of the human emotions at play. George wasn't born a monster. He was a husband, a father, a firefighter, someone admired and respected by his community. And yet, within him, there existed a darkness that even I, his wife, couldn't see until it was too late. This duality, the capacity for both love and destruction, exists within all of us. It's a stark reminder that relationships require more than love to thrive. They require respect, trust, and the willingness to address problems openly and honestly. When those elements are missing, even the strongest foundations can crumble. For those of you watching, I hope this story stays with you, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a call to action. Pay attention to the people in your life. Trust your instincts. Speak up when something doesn't feel right. And most importantly, don't ignore the warning signs. Life is precious, and so are the relationships we build. But they must be nurtured with care, honesty, and vigilance. Because as much as love has the power to heal, it also holds the potential to hurt when trust is broken and emotions go unchecked. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own relationships or brought to mind someone you care about, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might help someone else who's struggling to recognize the signs or find the strength to act. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories that delve into the complexities of human relationships and the darkest corners of human behavior, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue to share these important stories and bring awareness to the lessons they hold. And finally, thank you for listening to my story. It's not one I ever wanted to tell, but I hope that by sharing it, I can help others recognize the importance of trust, communication, and vigilance in their own lives. Stay safe, and take care of the people you love.